Hello, Sarah.
Good morning, and how are you today?
Oh, good morning. I'm well, thanks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again. We're going to continue with our Myth-busting in the Law series. So this is a focus on family law and the different aspects. Today, we're dealing with the huge area of domestic abuse and all that means in terms of definitions and how the legal system deals with domestic abuse and how we as lawyers look after you as our clients. So this is a really large area, and I think we've got so many statistics that we could actually share with you in terms of how things have been impacted most recently over the last couple of years, how there have been quite a few shifts in terms of culture. And we also wanted to focus on the myths that have really developed and how, in fact, they can be rebutted in some way. So I think I'll start, first of all, with the common misconception that it's only women who can be victims or survivors of domestic abuse. Now, I think generally we've all got a very wide understanding and awareness of the issues of domestic abuse, and no doubt many of us have heard about White Ribbon Day. White Ribbon Day was set up to really highlight and make everyone aware of the issues which predominantly women suffer in terms of domestic abuse, predominantly as a result of behaviour by male perpetrators. So this year, White Ribbon Day is on the 25th of November, so very soon. And in terms of these statistics, we're very fortunate that we've managed to have a great conversation with local charity and support group, Safe in Sussex, who were established originally as Worthing Women's Aid in 1977. And they provided us with some statistics which are really helpful in this regard. So as far as women are concerned, as victims or survivors, it's the case that 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. But it's also the case that, sadly, 1 in 6 men will experience domestic abuse in their lifetimes. So that's a figure which is less known to many people, but it is something which myself as a family law practitioner, I've come across on more than a handful of occasions in cases, and I think probably you'd say the same, Sarah.
Yes, absolutely. I think often men don't realise that that they've been the victim of domestic violence, because it will often come out in a conversation with them where an allegation may have been made by the other party that they've been controlling or they've behaved in a particular way. You'll raise the question of whether there's been any violence, and they will say, well, I've never hit her, but she has hit me. And they almost accept that, but don't appreciate that that's a problem within the relationship, and it does constitute domestic abuse.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is to do with stereotypes and cultural norms as to how men react, how they're perceived, how boys react, and it's all to do with education. I know that Safe in Sussex, the charity I've referred to, they actually work within the schools to encourage a wider understanding of healthy relationships for boys and girls as well. So that's a biggie, really, in terms of the myths. The second one I wanted to refer to is that it's not just adults, of course, who are victims or survivors of abuse, very sadly. So 1 in 5 children will experience domestic abuse in their lifetimes, and 1 in 5 teenagers as well. So that could be as a result of behaviour from boyfriend, girlfriend, partner. So there's an area there which we have touched upon to some extent previously in our earlier podcasts. It is the case that as far as the legal system is concerned, it's now about joining up that thinking and involving agencies which support children and really being able to hear the voice of the child and not just the voice of the child through adults who may put a different angle on it, which isn't true to the child.
I think I think it's important with children as well, who are the children of a domestically violent relationship, is that they don't have to witness it in the same room. They will still be aware of what is going on in in the house, and it will still have an impact on them. And one of the statistics I read was that men who witness domestic violence as children are twice as likely to be abusive in their own relationships as adults. And hopefully the work that Safe in Sussex are doing will help for those children to realise that that isn't the norm in a relationship, and that it doesn't have to be that way.
It's all about education, isn't it?
Yes.
So there's a lot of good work going on out there. So that's the positive to it. And thank you for that, Sarah. And sorry, then, so thirdly, what we wanted to share is that it's not just the relatively young. And I don't know if I can count myself within that category now or not, but in terms of relatively young, what we are noticing, I know Sarah shares this experience, is that more so we're having clients come to us who are in an older age bracket, so 60, 65, 70 plus, who sadly, or for whatever reason, the relationship's broken up, the marriage is broken up, and there may then also be a background of allegations of domestic abuse. And I think that's become more so over the years. And it may be just because people feel more able to access those feelings and concerns and actually voice them. That there is an atmosphere in which people feel safe to do so now, more so. But that's something that we have noticed. Also, and we touched upon this previously, the fact that if there are allegations of domestic abuse, that in itself doesn't mean that somebody cannot pursue contact with a child through proceedings, so Children's Act proceedings. And we did look at this previously. And again then, and this is a significant one also, if there are allegations of domestic abuse, it doesn't mean automatically that you, as the person who has been referred to as the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator of abuse, is not entitled to pursue a fair settlement in terms of the finances. So as far as the matrimonial finances are concerned, or the breakup of a partnership or cohabitation. So on first instance, you still have that entitlement. And it's all about context, and it's all about whether the allegations are found to be true and whether they're found to be relevant. So there's a lot more to it. So things are pretty much open at the start, and the court system is very much looking at the wider context of issues now. So that's in terms of the myths that we wanted to really look at. And so to bring those to the forefront, really, rather than having sort of stereotypical views of what domestic abuse is and who can actually be, sadly, a victim, a survivor, and or a perpetrator. So Sarah, in terms of domestic abuse itself, we've already said that obviously this is a far-reaching subject and a really tricky one to look at in terms of everything that it covers, and the fact that it is so subjective and how it affects different people in different ways. But what is domestic abuse, and how has the legal system really defined domestic abuse over the years?
Well, so I mean, historically, it has been recognised that it doesn't just have to be physical violence that constitutes domestic abuse, and it will be controlling, coercive behaviour, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. But historically, I think when it's become an issue, particularly within Children's Act proceedings, there has been a tendency to look to the physical harm that somebody has suffered. So whilst we've been alive to the fact that emotional abuse does exist, it's that physical violence that would have more of an impact on somebody's contact with their child. There has definitely been a shift over recent years towards recognizing that emotional abuse can be as harmful and needs to be recognized as abuse in exactly the same way as, or as far as possible, in the same way as physical abuse. And the Domestic Violence, the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 gives specific definitions of what is considered to be violence. So it will be physical or sexual abuse, violent or threatening behaviour. And often people who have been subject to violent or threatening behaviour or emotional behaviour won't necessarily recognise that that is abuse. And it might be that only when they come in and speak to us about potentially separating and issuing divorce proceedings or Children's Act proceedings that we can then discuss that with them, and they recognise that actually they are a survivor of domestic abuse and that this isn't the norm within a relationship. These aren't behaviours that should happen. So
No.
the third definition is controlling or coercive behaviour, economic abuse, and then psychological, emotional, or other abuse. And I think having it within that legislation really highlights that all of those are abuse, and none of them should be given priority over the other.
No, absolutely. Now that's really interesting. So we've got the Domestic Abuse Act, which came out this year. So that was following on from the appointment of the very first Domestic Abuse Commissioner in September 2019. We had the Harm Report in 2020. And there's been lots of multi-agency work basically to bring about joined up thinking, so that we've got statutory agencies, the government, we've got the police, we've got CAFCAS looking after children, social services, all joining together and saying we've got to approach this differently because it's wider than we really perceived it to be. But the interesting thing about coercive and controlling behaviour is that's actually been a crime since 2015.
Yes.
So that's 6 years ago, in fact. And of course, I think us as lawyers, we've referred to it, we've spoken of it, it's been generally in the media, people are generally aware of it, but it hasn't really been brought to the fore in itself as being a contextual background to what's going on. So it's always been a bit sort of, we've got a drop-down list of particular incidents of domestic abuse, so we can tick this one, or does that one apply? We need to have a date, we need to have an incident. So it's all been very much about that. And of course, funny enough, a lot of people don't actually keep a diary of when something occurred. Yeah. It's just a general background of an experience of this has been happening to me for a long time.
Yeah, and often it isn't a particular incident. If you took one of those incidents in isolation, where it's coercive behaviour or emotional abuse, if you took one of them in isolation, you might think, well, it's just one of those things that happen, but it's that pattern of behaviour, and it's the impact that that pattern has upon the victim that is the abusive part of it, as opposed to one particular. And the shift with moving away from having to list 6 incidents of abuse, that's got to be a good thing, because it shows that whole nature of the relationship, as opposed to these are the particular things, where because it could be a whole stream of things that have happened over a period of time.
Yes, absolutely. And I think with the controlling and the coercive, the problem is that if you are somebody who's been experiencing that, you're also going to feel less inclined perhaps to share things with, for instance, a judge, because anyone in control or anyone who appears to have that dominant position or that power position, you might be thinking, well, actually, you know, I'm just as afraid of telling this to the judge as I am in terms of the behaviour I'm experiencing, you know, from and by the perpetrator. So it's about trust in the system as well, isn't it? And building up that trust that people know they can come forward and that there really is support for them. There's a lot being looked at by the multi-agencies in terms of how children are looked after within the dual systems of criminal law, where there's been allegations, and also within family law, and linking up the two, so that basically people who are survivors don't have to duplicate and repeat themselves. And because the general feedback has been from all of these various research groups and resources is that a lot of victims and survivors feel that the legal process has in the past re-traumatized them, and they've gone through it all over again. So I think what's actually occurred in the last couple of years is amazing, because it is putting a very proactive approach on everything in terms of us all working together and actually looking at those issues in detail, rather than just thinking, okay, so what happened? Was there a physical situation here? But it's more subtle than that, isn't it? And it's looking at the narrative. I did notice also in terms of the, you know, the wide-ranging and non-exhaustive scope of domestic abuse, that, for instance, it's now also an offence, and also in terms of allegations which are looked at, it's also the case of, for instance, if somebody threatens to share intimate images of you, so you break up, you've been together, they've got photos of you. If they even threaten to share those images, not that they're actually going to do so even, that in itself is an offence and an allegation to be relied upon. So it really is being completely opened up now in terms of what people are truly experiencing.
Yes.
So it's a positive, isn't it?
Yes,
in terms of, when we're looking after our clients, it's a real positive because it is opening up everything rather than things being hidden previously, and hopefully more people will feel able to access that help as such. It also links up with other issues in terms of needs such as housing, and obviously because we see clients generally at the point at which sadly there's a breakup of a relationship, quite often we will be the point of need in terms of that overall toolkit that clients can access, where they may actually say to us, so this is happening with my domestic situation, this also happened, and they may even be minimising it without appreciating that actually it is abuse. And then, of course, we're having to deal with the family home and the aftermath of all of that, who's going to live where, and that's impacted on by domestic abuse issues.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think I've found more recently that when people have sought help from the police, that they have been put in touch with local agencies such as Safe in Sussex, who will then help them to address those immediate issues. So if the situation is such as it often would be, that they can't stay in the house together, that they will be helped to get an injunction so that they can stay in the house, and the perpetrator is removed, and they may well be subject to bail conditions at the same time, but that will put some immediate safeguard in place for them. But then obviously we then have to look at the longer term, because those are the immediate steps, but we would then have to look at the arrangements with the children, look at the division of the finances. So it's definitely a more joined up system between the police and those initial agencies who can help with injunctions and occupation orders and non-molestation orders. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think with the police generally, I don't know from your experience, Sarah, but my thoughts are that definitely in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a progression and an evolution in terms of the understanding of domestic abuse and taking things more seriously generally. And it was quite interesting when I was having a look at what sort of the local police are doing. For instance, Sussex Police have got a programme called Men and Masculinities. So it's actually working with perpetrators, potential perpetrators, men in general, to actually identify stereotypical behaviour and risk factors, because it is all about basically safeguarding and risk at the end of the day is what we're looking at, and we're all actually contributing to that. So again, that will build up people's trust, and it's an ongoing work in progress, isn't it, in terms of all of this, because it's not going to happen overnight.
But also, according to the Office of National Statistics, 70 of the people reported as perpetrators of domestic violence, 73% of people were charged, and of those people, 75% of the CPS prosecutions were successful. So I think that again shows that everybody is understanding it more and taking it more seriously. Years ago, it would be lots of these things were deemed domestic incidents, and they wouldn't do anything more, or they'd send them off to solicitors and say, it's a civil matter, we can't deal with it. But there is definitely an acknowledgement by the police that these are serious incidents and they need to be treated criminally because they are abusive. Yeah,
absolutely. There's been an acknowledgement by the police, and also thankfully by the senior judiciary as well. There's been some recent Court of Appeal cases which have really fed into this in terms of the judiciary and the legal system appreciating the nuances of domestic abuse more so, and the fact that judges are actually receiving training now on the fact that female abusers should be dealt with in the same way as male abusers.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is pretty revolutionary. I mean, it's absolutely correct, but revolutionary for the legal system, sadly.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that stems from historically there was a tendency to look at the physical injury that someone sustained and the severity of that, and therefore you would punish somebody according to that. But now there's a shift towards recognizing that it's not just those physical injuries that have an impact on people, and it's nature that generally men are stronger and will inflict greater injuries if they are the perpetrator. But that doesn't mean that the crime committed by a woman is any worse than that of a man who has inflicted an injury or inflicted abuse of any sort on their partner.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this all develops, isn't it? And also how it's looked at through the eyes of the media, the public, in terms of the take up. And I mean, for instance, I think you and I were talking earlier about Netflix, wasn't it? And
yes,
the series May.
Yes, and how she was a typical example of somebody who didn't even realise that they were the victim of domestic violence, or that there was help out there available to her, but only once she had that recognition and could say, yes, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. And it's education, isn't it? And
it is.
And people knowing that these aren't normal behaviours or acceptable behaviours within a relationship, and that abuse doesn't just have to be hitting.
No, absolutely. And I think that's it, isn't it? And the fact that, sadly, with reference to those earlier statistics that we've shared, a lot of people are going to experience it. We're all going to know someone, sadly, who's experienced it in some shape or form.
Yes.
And that does mean then that there's more people looking out for one another. So we're all there for one another in terms of the support that we can offer. What I think we're going to do, Sarah, is put some links on our website, aren't we?
Yes.
In terms of more information about the support that's out there, because this is such a vital subject for people to be able to access the help that they need. We've referred to Safe in Sussex a couple of times. They've been brilliant in sharing information with us about their services. They do have refuge and community support services. They work in the schools. They also work with perpetrators. They also offer support services for men as well as women, and of course for children. So there's a lot of great stuff happening out there. So we'll put some details on the website so that it's accessible for people. And it's really just the case that we would say as lawyers, we're developing our understanding. We believe we've always understood what domestic abuse means, but I believe we've got a greater, more appreciative and empathetic understanding than before, even as a result of the developments which have happened. And it's really us as part of that overall toolkit for clients, isn't it? So even in terms of accessing help from a charity such as Safe in Sussex to help with drafting statements or things like that initially, probably there's going to be the case that our client, the person in question, will have a divorce or financial issues or children's matters. And that's where we come in with our expert skills and ability to look after you so that you have that whole package in terms of your support needs.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's the take-home message, is that it's far more common than we think.
Yeah.
The survivors aren't alone. There is help there available.
Yeah.
And the developments in the recent years has meant that those hubs of help, I suppose, are working more closely together. So it's more of a joined up system for people who need help.
Yes, it is. And that's got to be a brilliant thing, hasn't it?
Yes, yeah. So I think progress has definitely been made.
Yeah. Okay, we'll keep going.
Yes. Right, we'll be back next month with a festive special if we can think of something.
Oh. Right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate that. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Take good care, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.